This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.
Juan, before we move on with our first story, this is kind of your alma mater. This is the place you worked for almost 30 years, the New York Daily News. Now, the latest round of cuts, half the staff has been fired by the new owner, Tronc.
Yes, Amy. Unfortunately, I expected that this was going to happen once Tronc took over. Tronc, of course, is the successor to the old Tribune company, and that was a company that, when I first got to the Daily News in 1987, was running the Daily News and provoked a strike of the 2,500 employees of the newspaper back then. And back then, I would say in the late 80s, early 1990s, there were about 450 people in the newsroom. I think there were more in the 50s, but by then, by the late 80s and beginning of the 90s, we had about 450. So to go now to 45, 1/10 of the staff, and you've got to think that New York City back then had maybe 7.5 million people. Today, New York City has 8.5 million people. So you're talking about a much bigger city, many fewer reporters. It's just a tragedy what's happening to the newspaper business, and not the fact that the papers are not publishing as many papers, because obviously they have websites, but that the staffs continue to shrink of the people who are actually producing original news. It's ludicrous to think that you can put out a major news site in New York covering New York City with just 45 people.
And as Jim Rich said, the now fired editor-in-chief, if you hate democracy and think local government should operate unchecked and in the dark, then today is a good day for you. What does this mean for cities all over and towns across the country that are losing their media, their newspapers?
Well, that's the big question in the media today is, how do you provide local news? Because there'll always be national outlets, networks, and cable systems to produce the national news. But who's going to cover your local school board, your local city council, the decisions that affect your zoning and your changes in your city or your town? Fewer and fewer reporters every day are doing that.
And of course, we'll continue to cover these issues all over the country.